Hello, and thank you for joining our LinkedIn Live series, where we are continuing to explore how data and analytics are influencing a wide range of industries. My name is Jeremy Petranka, and I am the Associate Dean of the Quantitative Management Programs at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. Our Master of Quantitative Management programs are designed to bridge the gap between more modern data science tools and the specific strategic and operational needs of businesses. So oftentimes we'll hear about data science tools transforming industries, but with a focus on larger firms with a massive amount of data at their disposal. But equally dynamic in the last decade have been the innovations in the startup world. I'm extremely excited to talk about what that looks like with David Hailey, a Fuqua alum, who, without deep or any data science experience, founded Countify and is the CEO. So Countify uses image analysis and data analytics to manage inventory more efficiently. It's one of those ideas that honestly made me think, why didn't I think of that? But David did, and Countify is currently helping hospitals, airlines, universities kind of rethink how they're doing inventory. They worked with Delta, Emirates, Duke Hospital, North Carolina A&T University, just to name a few. And as promised, before he started Countify, he wasn't a data scientist. Instead, he was a general manager at Delta and a manager at EY. And his background is a bachelor's and master's in accounting from NC State and an MBA from, of course, Fuqua. So with that, David, thank you so much for being here today.
Hello. How you doing? You did a great job with that introduction, man. I love it.
That's the other reason I love talking to you. So Countify, again, the first time you talked about it, it really did make me just think, that is a perfect use case. It's a perfect example of how transformational, fairly off-the-shelf data science techniques can be when they're applied to the right business needs. I also think that your journey, personally, is really inspirational for people who kind of see the needs like the way you did, but don't necessarily have a strong data science background and are worried that they can't make this type of pivot. So with that, though, let's just get started on Countify itself. So can you give everyone an idea of what the problem Countify was designed to solve and how it solves it?
Yeah, so during my career, I've spent, as you said, time at EY, time at Delta, did a lot of manual inventory counting that usually always suck. They are always at the wrong time. Any former Big Four accountants out there that know that, you usually can't plan New Year's because on January 1st, because companies have their 12/31 year end, you have to be somewhere counting something at some remote location. And so doing that for a number of years, and then realizing while I was in the airline industry that the whole entire industry there's a lot of improvements that can be made from a accounting perspective. Your large airlines can spend close to $1 billion for the type of inventory they put on the plane. That's the food, liquor, beer, wine that you enjoy while you're on the plane, but still don't have a good sense of controls over those items. And if they do, a lot of those controls are manual. Right? There's someone is somewhere manually counting those items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it just takes a lot of time. If you think about manually counting, 2,000 miniature liquor bottles, right? You'll probably be drinking after you count like 100, right? Because it's just so intensive. And so I thought about with that problem, especially with the advances of the technology, how can we form something or solve that problem and use technology to do it? And that's how computer vision came into the play. Just because the advances of computer vision, everyone has a smartphone in their hand, in their pocket now. Advances of other technologies that we use that can use that to solve that problem, help bring those manual processes, add some tech to those manual processes, make it easier, simpler, and save time.
So what's the idea behind Countify? Are you basically using image analysis to look at the items coming through as opposed to a person counting them?
Exactly. So we try to not change behavior too much. For the airline example, you think about those beverage carts that come off the plane. Instead of what usually happens, they come off the plane, they go back to a big kitchen facility. And this happens almost at every airline all around the world. They come back to a big kitchen facility and they get them ready for the very next plane. Right. So if we think about a beverage cart that might have 5 different types of sodas, whether it's Sprite, ginger ale, Coke, Coke Zero, and Diet Coke. Those 5, somebody will look and say, okay, how many do we have left and how many do we need to go to the next plane? What our process is we have a camera inside of that kitchen facility. And as those items come in, before that person puts or refills that tray, they either hit a button or it does it automatically. It'll take a picture of that square, right? It takes a picture of that square and it counts the items and they just move on. It takes about a second. So it doesn't add any additional real time to overall throughput. But what it does, and then the data itself is usually not needed by that person, but somebody in supply chain, somebody in finance will be the one that using that data. So we have a dashboard that they'll look and say, hey, the flight from, I'm in Atlanta, the flight from New York City, from LaGuardia to Atlanta, we see that 75% of the Bacardi rum or the Coke Zero is not being consumed, right? So what we do, we give them more data to allow for better decisions, right? So if those items are not being consumed, is there a way that we can smart or optimize our inventory? And a lot of times we see that, and this is, like I said, almost every airline you see, they're over ordering because they want to make sure the customer experience is optimal. And so, but if there's a way that you can smart order, right, and order based on actual data, and so we'll give them data back that says, okay, this Bacardi rum or this Jack Daniels is 65% is not being consumed, or even 30% is not being consumed. Is there a way that we can reduce this inventory? Or we see that the Grey Goose is being consumed at 100% and we always run out, right? So is there a way we can pull levers to make sure that, one, the customer is satisfied, and two, we can right size our inventory, which usually ends up in some type of inventory reduction.
And it feels like, again, just kind of thinking through that process, that any inventory process that has, high turnover and fairly standardized products with a process that goes through a physical point, it feels like this is just perfectly aligned with anything in that ballpark. Is that?
Yep, it is. It is. And you think about a lot of, even the people that use, like RFID. RFID is a big thing now that a lot of companies are used. We did a lot of research with RFID. The issue is, from that perspective, and that as the same kind of environment that you just explained, as one access point in and out, and is there an easier way to count? But what we realize is, even with RFID, you have to have a tag on each individual item, right? So if you think about, your big airlines might go through 100,000 miniature bottles, 100,000 cans of Coke per day, right? And so because of that, where the limitation of our RFID comes to play, and that's why we use computer vision to help solve that problem. But you're right; it doesn't have to be airline items. Like, we have healthcare clients as well, where we will put a camera into a storeroom, and instead of a nurse or somebody's supply chain or somebody inventory management coming in and manually counting those items, we actually, in that situation, we actually take the human element totally out of it, and we'll install a camera inside of a storeroom. And so we'll take pictures several times a day, 3-4 times a day. And then without going to the actual storeroom, somebody anywhere actually around the world can look at that dashboard and know exactly how much inventory is in that room. So it's really just, it's really taking a manual process and adding technology to it to increase efficiency. Especially when you have the healthcare space, we see a lot of labor shortages, a lot of labor issues as well. And so we give that time back where they can do something more efficient, like save lives, or, everything the hospitals do.
So in terms of the technology itself, how much, if you kind of think about what's under the hood, how much of what you do is based on kind of open source, fairly off the shelf, data science components versus bleeding edge tools? Like, is where your value lives that you are doing kind of cutting edge data science that other people aren't doing, or is it something else?
Yeah, so it's a mixture of the two, truthfully. So from a computer vision neural network process, a lot of the neural network items are open source, right? So you can get a kind of a baseline neural network project or model available. What we do, though, is we take a more consultative approach around our platform and get a deep understanding of our customers' problems. And then we will build a model strictly based on our customers' inventory. So, for example, I keep saying Coke or a can of Coke. You think it's a can of Coke is a can of Coke, but it's not. Like, the can of Coke that you might have at Delta, even though we might have, let's say, 50,000 images of a can of Coke on our server, you go to another airline or another country, in Emirates, the can of Coke might be in Arabic, right? And so because we're using computer vision, we have to train our models on that specific can of Coke. Or it might be, it's usually the same size, but any difference in these items, we have to make sure our model is very specific to those items. And so where there is some items that are off the shelf, we try to make sure, one, our models are based on your specific inventory and the process in which we take the images as well. So it's not just, hey, it's a one size fits all. It's very specific to our potential clients' problems.
Are you also helping companies start using that data?
Yeah, exactly. Because now a lot of times we see that this is data that they haven't seen before, right? So whether they're manually counting or whether they are not counting at all, right? If they're manually counting, it's usually a person or a team of two people with a clipboard and a piece of paper, right? That are going around counting these items. Or even if they have tablets or smart books now, smartphones, they're still manually putting those items in. And so having this type of data allows them to make a lot more like smarter forecasting decisions. If you think about it, the example I said where, you can see that 75% of Jack Daniels is not being consumed. Like now that will enhance my forecasting. Like if I know on this particular route or this particular time period that we have a lot more of one particular product, how can I optimize my ordering, right? And what we usually see is it reduces the inventory levels, usually reduces the labor associated with it as well, right? Because now I don't have a person, if I have 75% less of an item, that's 75% more less time that somebody has to be moving that item around. And then from an airline perspective, every pound has a fuel coefficient as well, right? So you think about if I'm adding or reducing the inventory amount, I'm reducing the weight, and which I'm reducing the fuel as well. So you can even get some like a credit for being more sustainable as well in our process.
That is really cool. The wheels are spinning on the number of use cases in airlines, but then outside of airlines that this would work. But without going down that rabbit hole, I want to talk about how you got there, because I think that's the one that was not surprising, but so impressive. That you're the founder, you're the CEO of primarily a data science-based company. That's the core technology, but you don't have a traditional data science background. Can you walk me through like how you recognize that there's a problem that needed solving, but also how you realize that data science could get you there if you weren't actually aware of all the things that data science can do?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So yes, I'm not a data scientist, not a computer scientist. Do not code at all. Do not code any of the languages. But I knew from a just overall computer vision perspective that the advancements in computer vision for the last 10 years have been immense. If you think about it, right? You can open the Amazon app now and go to the grocery store and, take a look at a barcode and it'll tell you exactly where those items are and what the price is, cost is, how long it takes you to get there. So computer vision is have leaps and bounds where it was, even five years ago. And everybody has a smartphone in their hand now, right? Has at least a 10 megapixel camera, which you can get very, 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 very clear, very, very good data. But in my case specifically, like I knew what the problem was. Like I understood the problem, understood kind of the overall value proposition, but you're right, I did not know how to solve it. Like there has to be a way to solve. We looked at RFID. I was talking about RFID a little while ago. Like, is there a way to implement RFID to solve this problem? Is there a way we've been looked at from an airline perspective, we've been looked at like robot arms. Is there a way that we can use a robot arm to move these items? But that's like, a lot of those are just too capital intensive. And I was actually in like an entrepreneur group. This is before I even had ever started the company. And I was kind of talking about the problem I was trying to solve. And actually one of the professors, I think it was a Georgia Tech professor, mentioned computer vision. And so as we started talking about computer vision and the capabilities, I was like, oh, that makes sense. I think we have some. And so that's where it all started. Because you're right, it was really putting myself in an environment of other entrepreneurs, other coders, so to speak. And that gave me the idea of, or someone actually told me that you can use computer vision, and that kind of gave me the idea to start researching more.
So I can see you begin to start going down that path and saying, all right, let's see what's possible. What was the kind of turning point for you that you, especially, where you focused your energy wasn't on you deeply understanding the data scientist. It was getting the experts in the room that you trusted and really
Right.
understanding the client. So where did you have that point that you were confident enough in the approach and that the offering that you decided you could go all in and in some ways effectively manage a data science company? Like what was that process that you said, okay, this is it, this is my new path?
Yep. So we were at an idea stage, and we were still going through kind of talking to, and at this point we were just airlines. We were just focused on that airline problem, hadn't expanded into any other industry yet. And we were invited to an airline conference. I think JetBlue invited us to a conference to pitch. And we ended up winning that pitch competition, or getting second in that pitch competition, I believe. I think it was rigged. We should have got first, but we ended up getting, I think the company who got first, JetBlue, had already invested in them. So that's a whole other story. Um, so we ended up getting second in that competition. And from there, we met an accelerator program. And so the accelerator program was kind of an airline-based accelerator program. And we're still at idea stage. And that program kind of gave us a little bit more, I guess, more confidence about kind of what we could do, what the capabilities were. And then we started talking to more airlines. The funny part is because of that accelerator program is what caused me to go all in. And this was 2019. I think it's 2019, close to 2020. And as we know, in in, in Q1 and Q2 of 2020 is when COVID hit, right? And the entire travel industry just broke down. Nobody spent any money. Nobody was just doing any new projects, doing anything, because nobody was flying, nobody was traveling. We were all stuck home. And so looking back, I probably should have started like a Grubhub or Instacart type company. Would have been a lot smarter than starting an airline-based inventory management company. But but from that, it actually was a blessing in disguise. It allows us to one use like kind of build an internal team as well. Because before we were using some off the shelf items, but it allowed us to build an internal team, kind of sit back, think about the really what computer vision could do. We actually brought a data scientist on the team, met a data scientist that had done work with here in Atlanta, had done a lot of work with other like well known companies. Brought him on the team, and then he started opening up my eyes about what the real capabilities of computer vision and artificial intelligence, deep learning could do. And that was a real turning point. I think COVID, unfortunately, was bad on the entire world, but for us, it was actually a blessing in disguise because it allowed us to kind of gain some bench strength and get some real data science knowledge on our team.
So going more into that process now, one of the things that I wanted to ask you is that decision to start bringing on data scientists. There's kind of different views on whether I don't want to call you a data science company because the actually inventory rethinking the process is kind of the core offering with
Right.
the data really enabling that to happen. That said, the core underlying technology is data science, and it's kind of
Hmm.
different thoughts on whether the founding team has to have a data scientist on it in terms of a co-founder or whether you can actually just hire them as employees. So you've navigated one version of that, and so you have some kind of the benefit of hindsight. What are your thoughts on that decision?
I mean, I think from a just because you have a data scientist, like if a core data scientist, doesn't mean you have a successful company, right? And so I think the if I would have known now what I know before, I would have, you know, potentially brought on a data scientist earlier, but like they're not cheap, right? So our lead data scientist has a PhD in computer science, right? And so it's not that many of them in the country. So and a lot of them know their value, right? So I think part of that is I don't think it's necessary to have a data scientist as a co-founder, so to speak. But they need to be pretty close. They need to be pretty close, especially if you are a database company, right? And their skill set is what you need to prove to clients that you can deliver value. Because I think it's we look at it as two things. We look at it as kind of sales and awareness, especially from a startup perspective. How many people or how many companies can we make sure they are aware of what we do, right? And then how can we make sure that we have the knowledge and the skills and really the proof to back it up that we can actually do what we say we do, right? Because you'll have a lot of AI companies that are not really AI, right? There's just, there's a team of people in somewhere in some close or remote place that are really just doing a bunch of manual counting. That's very, really cheap, like M-Turkers or whatever you know from an Amazon perspective, that are doing that. So I think to answer your question, you don't have to have a data scientist, in my opinion, data scientist as one of the co-founders, but they need to be very close. But you need to make sure you can bring sales in the door. Because like without sales, without revenue, without that client awareness, like you're just a bunch of people in a room just talking about stuff.
So let's actually talk about that. One of the things that I think is idiosyncratic about AI and machine learning in the startup world is that creating a minimally viable product can be tricky. Normally we think of MVPs as get something out there so you can start testing your theories on what customers want, what they're willing to buy, what works, what doesn't, as you start adjusting your strategy. But with pretty much data science inherently, you have to be able to train it on data that makes it good enough. And the startup might not have access to data. You might also not have the resources to do a fully fleshed out production model. So as you were in this process of finding initial customers, but getting it to market, how did you balance the need to get to market, but then also having your data science on what you knew was solid ground, which again can have this longer runway?
Yeah, I think part of that is understanding. As I said, we take a more of a consultative approach to what we do. Part of that is understanding the current model, like not the current computer vision model, but the current process of what they're currently doing. Like, how are you currently managing your inventory? Are you manually counting these items all the time, right? And so even if you don't have a model that's ready today, we know that we can add some value over your current process, right? Because if you're saying, hey, I have two people out, we just talked to a potential client yesterday that does physical inventories. They have a counter and a recorder, right? That counter and the recorder goes around the warehouse and counts those items. If they get anything wrong, then a different counter and recorder has to go out the next process and count and look at the items that were missed. And then a fifth person has to go out and reconcile of those two teams, right? So and this is a very sophisticated company. So in that one process, and they do this monthly, there's 5 people that have to count those items, right? So even if we say, hey, we might not have a model that's ready tomorrow, we know that we can start with the process and get better than what you're currently doing, right? We can send one person out, even if tomorrow we can start with our mobile app and send one person out and start doing those counts. And then we can start building that model, start gaining our data sets to help count. And the good part about what we do is once you take those pictures, you still have all the metadata associated with those images as well. So you can look at them anytime. I can see that on David's device, he took a picture. It was April 1st at 3:30, right? I have all that data. So, and it's always automated, right? So you can always go back and verify. So I think one, to answer your question, kind of being very transparent about you will not have an overall computer vision model today, but compared to your current process, we can make sure that we are more efficient, giving value, more accuracy, and cheaper than your current process.
And that is brilliant because just throwing computer vision at a process may or may not help anything. The
right.
fact that you're first just understanding their process and improving the process with or without computer vision is that's a really clever.
Because one of our first clients, we actually, before any computer vision happened at all, as I said, I'm a former accountant. I wasn't a very good one. That's why I'm here doing tech stuff. But you go and do like process narratives. Like you go talk to the team and talk about what's your process. What do you do from an inventory perspective? And actually, we did overall process narratives. And so we didn't even pull out a camera, didn't pull out any computer vision stuff at all, but started with those process narratives and say, okay, this is what we understand your process. And the funny part is they paid us for that, right? They said, hey, we don't have this process documented anywhere else. And so that was kind of started to be how we understood exactly what you do. And so now that we have a deep understanding of what you do, now we can implement the computer vision process to say, all right, here's how we know we can save time doing your inventory process.
And so for those first customers, did you rely more on your kind of inventory accounting background and that kind of network to identify those?
Oh, totally. Yes. So we kind of talking through kind of where I knew the problem, where I knew the problems lie, and using your network, getting an understanding of what the current processes are. And we usually kind of start with taking a tour. Like, okay, we might not be the right company for you, but can we take a tour of your facilities and just understand your current process? That might take an hour, right? And after that, we say, well, we see you're currently counting here. Actually, one of the first hospitals that we got, we were taking a tour of the hospital. We walked into a room and there was about $500,000 of items that the person did not know was there. And they were like, holy crap, now what am I gonna do? Right. And they had just completed the inventory the week before. Right. So now you have to do adjustments. Now you have to do, and I was like, I think we can help solve this problem. Right. And so that instance almost sold itself. So
there's at least $500,000 of value.
Exactly. At least $500,000. Exactly.
So actually, if you're comfortable talking about the pricing, one of the things on, and again, this is not solely data science, but it's a little bit magnified, is the idea that if we're thinking about the customer life cycle and what their value is over the life cycle, there is this longer and this larger setup cost, because you have to train. One, you have to understand the process, but then you have to train the model, and that can take a while. So, you have heavy upfront costs, but then once it's trained, your costs drop to quite low and their benefit goes to quite high. Can you give an idea of kind of what your thoughts are in terms of how you price, kind of handling that?
Yeah, so that's actually not totally true, right? Because if you think about, you can train a model, but things are always changing, right? If you think about from an airline perspective, the menu items are always changing, the offerings are always changing. So they might offer Bailey's today, and they might go with a different Irish cream tomorrow, right? And so in that type of situation, the model is constantly changing, constantly needs to be updated. And even with hospital type inventory, like there's always different SKU numbers that are coming in. There's always something different. So we're from a model perspective, we are constantly always kind of updating our models, looking at our models, making sure it's accurate. We have about, we of all of our results, we take about at least 10% and make sure there's a human in the loop to look at and audit those items to make sure that the computer vision model itself is correct. And so from a value perspective, from an expense perspective, it doesn't always like, hey, all the expenses are front loaded and then it gets the margins grow a lot towards the end because you're constantly building the model. But from a cost perspective, we always make sure that we're delivering value, right? We try not to make it a cost decision from a client perspective. We just say, hey, this is how much value we are delivering. And, our dashboards are pretty upfront about that, like understanding what your employee costs are, understanding what the overall error rates are, right? If you're manually counting stuff, the human error can be, 30-40% sometimes, right? Because from the time you take a clipboard to write something down, then the time you take that clipboard to a computer to type that into something, like the human error can get relatively 1 0 can mess up a month, right? So we try to make sure from a value perspective that we are delivering value, and it's not a cost discussion; it's a value discussion.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. And I hate to do this. There's quite a few more questions I'd love to ask you, and every time I talk to you is I always learn something, and it is inspirational to see what you've built. So with that, I can't thank you enough for being here today. I think your story is incredibly inspirational. I think that a lot of people that might have had some uncertainty in leaning into this, your story really does show that it's very accessible. And I sincerely appreciate you digging into it a bit with us.
No problem, man.
No,
thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
For everyone watching, please follow Fuqua on LinkedIn to stay in the loop about these analytics conversations, and also our series featuring faculty members and insights from their research.